You've been studying economic policy since the late 80s. You're open to view things extremely neutrally.
I'm forced to. When you try and say something nuanced, both sides hate you.
Government currently takes all feedback as a personal attack.
Yes. Anybody who says which is one-way narrative, generally that messenger is shot down.
We had a political commentator on the show. He said that whatever growth you see in India would have happened even if the Congress was there, because the growth is an outcome of the population.
Leadership does matter. BJP economic policy has broadly been sensible, and that has helped. What you see in India, has India changed in 5-10 years?
I don't know enough about economics to be able to gauge who's saying the truth or whose theories actually make more sense.
I hate to say it, entire mainstream media is being controlled by the government and its narrative.
Globally, our reputation is taking a hit because of this whole dictatorial tag.
It personally pains me. I had met Putin. I addressed all the problems in Russia were. But because I said all this, I've been completely blacklisted. I don't want a similar ecosystem to be created in India.
So you scan the last 25 years.
We have, over the last 25 years, done 32 election trips. And we have to figure out on the ground what's going on.
In all these years, what you learned about India.
Your vote decided by religion or even caste.
Do you think that the BJP government is trying to take it to that growth?
I think everyone's given up on that ambition.
Ab ki baar 400 par?
I don't think so. In 2014, it was the Modi wave. This time, I did not see any big wave.
I would love to know your report card of the BJP in the last 10 years. We've discovered an all-star on TRS. Ladies and gentlemen, he's an author, he's an investor, he's a fund manager, he's a columnist. He's one of the most respected people in the world of finance and economics. Ruchir Sharma makes his debut on TRS today. It's a deeply political episode, but there's no strong opinions that are not backed by data. That's what I loved about this particular conversation. I think in all our political conversations that we've had till this point on TRS, this is the most unbiased and most data and experience-backed political conversation that we're going to bring to you. Trust me, there's nuggets that you're going to pick up from today's conversation that are going to stay with you for a very long time, that are going to shape up your own political opinion, and that are going to probably make you slightly more centrist, or at least shift your leanings a little bit. If you have very, very strong political leanings, I still feel this is the episode for you. We need more voices like Ruchir Sharma on the Indian internet. This is an epic episode. Make sure you watch it till the end. All right, Ruchir Sharma, how are you, good sir?
Thanks, Ranveer. I'm delighted to do this after having heard so much about your incredible following on Instagram and other social media feeds.
I'm very, very excited to speak with you, primarily because while researching for this particular episode, I saw that there's almost no casual conversations done with you. You're always dressed in a suit and you're talking about some very technical details about the economies of different countries.
Right.
But I personally believe that any important conversation should be understood by a 12-year-old and a 90-year-old, considering that both of them are kind of, or might be kind of, cut off from the updates that daily news could bring.
Right.
Is that a fair approach according to you?
Yeah, of course. In terms of, it's one of those very basic rules of even writing that I always believe in, which is that if you can't explain a subject simply enough, it means you haven't understood it well enough. So I think that that has always been my mantra while writing. And I think that that's what you're trying to get at here.
Yeah, I'd love for you to explain your job and your interests to a 6-year-old.
Okay, so at some level, what happened was this, which is that from a very young age, I got really interested in economics. I'd say around the age of 16 or something, I made up my mind that I want to pursue something which is related to economics. Now, what do you mean by economics even, right? Which is that I was very interested in the way that the world of finance, money works, and, like in terms of how economies work. And that's something which I always tell people. In fact, like a question which people ask me is quite often is that, oh, are you very bright, intelligent? I said, no. My comparative advantage, as I say, was only that at a very young age, as I said, around the age of 16 or so, it became very clear to me as to what I wanted to do in life.
What appealed to you at that age? At
Yeah.
16, you're usually figuring out life.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at 16, I was just like heartbroken.
Right.
My priority was that girl. But what happened at age 16? What did you read? What did you know about economics for it to be something that interested you?
Yeah, like I was very interested in global affairs. And part of this may have been because even though I grew up in India, I spent a lot of time growing up in India. In my formative years, as you can say, like in class 7, I went abroad. My dad was in a transferable job and he was posted in the Indian High Commission in Singapore. And when I was there, I studied at a school. It's in fact known now, still around and quite well known, called the United World College. And I was before that in a prep school associated with it. And so what happened there was that you got a lot of people you met from around the world. And that helped shape my thinking or my interest. It piqued my curiosity that, okay, in terms of what's happening in different parts of the world. And that, I think, was the foundation that it exposed me to a lot of global affairs. But also my interest in Indian politics for some reason also took off around that age. So at that point in time, this is back in the late 1980s, there was obviously no internet, nothing. And so what would happen was that my father, he would receive a stack of newspapers from India every week. Yeah, all the Standard Times of India newspapers, all the magazines, would come. And I would end up reading a lot of those magazines and newspapers. Plus, there were other global newspapers that you had exposure to, such as the International Herald Tribune those days. Even some of the magazines like Newsweek, Time, all those would just come to my father's office. And then, like he'd bring them home. And like I was very, somehow, even at that young age, I got very fascinated seeing all this. All this stuff would come about. And I think that there was another reason for it also, which I think is, sort of important. That because I would change schools so often, my father was in a transferable job. Every 2 to 3 years, I was changing schools. And I was a bit lonely at some level. I didn't have those many close friends because, like what is like every new school you go to every 2 or 3 years. So I didn't have too many close friends. So I think the combination of being a bit lonely, not knowing what to do, plus being sort of surrounded by all this material coming your way, and also being at a school where a lot of people came from different parts of the world, I think that, like all came together and really got me interested in what's happening around the world and how does, how do different factors come together to make economies work, to make politics work. And I would, see television, see all these images of people like Reagan in the US and all that. And always very sort of, at some level, was always very nationalistic, which is that always had a deep liking for India. That really ran through my DNA. And it would always be that if those countries are doing so well, especially back then, why is India not doing better? That was always a question that would bother me, that because we still were seen as a pretty backward nation out then. And yet the only global figure we sort of had was our prime minister those days, Rajiv Gandhi, and he'd wear these Ray-Ban glasses and he'd go abroad. So all this I'm just telling you as context.
No, sure.
From the, from the ages of about, I'd say, like how old was I back then? In the late, like about 13 years old or something, right? So like in my early teens, that's when like all this was going on. So that really set the base for it. And then I came back to India. My father was transferred back here to India. And I went to school. In fact, I came back and I did my 11th and 12th class at DPS Arkepuram in Delhi. It was a very nerdy school, the kind of place where like everyone went to prepare to go to IIT or AIMS and stuff like that. But I somehow was always very interested in pursuing this line further. And then obviously we were introduced to economics as a subject in school to study at that age. And I thought that economics is very much like this. It's about studying what's happening in around the world. It's studying human behavior. And so that just appealed to me a lot. And I was always very interested in global affairs. And for me, economics was something which always was at the cutting edge of that. So I think that all these factors came together to make me really interested in economics. And I sort of made up my mind at the age of 16, I'd say, by the time I was in my 12th class, which is that if I want to do something in life, it has to be related to economics. And I dedicated all my energy to it. In fact, in class also, when there were so many subjects had been made to study, but I was only interested in one subject, which was economics. And even when we do subjects like maths, my interest was what part of maths is relevant to economics. You know, there are some things like you do like calculus and probability and stuff like that. In fact, probability is a very important subject, which really appealed to me. So, like even in maths, I'd only do well in those subsets which were relevant to economics. So it just became a passion for this, and that's what put me on this path.
You're born to do exactly the job that you're doing right now.
Exactly. So I think that's really what it was at that age.
While I was researching for this podcast, I saw these interactions you did with Pranay Roy.
Yes.
And he really trusts all your future predictions. I've seen very few interactions of journalists with top economists where they're so reliant on someone's predictions. So it says something about your pedigree, which is why I asked you the first question. In terms of you've been studying, I'm assuming what is economic policy since the late 80s.
Right.
And this is a subject I've only recently got to know. Like, I'm an engineer by education. So I look at the world in a very machine and mathematics and physics oriented light.
Right.
And it's only at age 29 or 30 that I got to meet Sanjeev Sanyal sir,
Right.
Dr. Raghuram Rajan. All these guys who've explained economics from a very political lens.
Yeah.
So for me, economics is a set of policies that are created in theory, and when they're turned into actual laws or actual changes in the land, it's almost kind of slightly unpredictable about what will pan out.
Yeah.
And then based on what happens, you kind of figure the practical application of your own theories.
Right.
Now, in order to simply come up with those policies, you have to do a lot of studying. You have to observe the world. You have to adopt the best aspects of economics from countries that are doing better than yourself. You're supposed to learn from your own mistakes.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that this just teaches you about humankind in more detail.
Yeah. Very true.
Is there anything else that I've missed out from a very basic explanation, or would you add anything to what I've said about the subject of economics?
Well, I'll say two things. First, for the subject of economics, a very basic way of understanding it is that it is a study of human behavior.
Sure.
That's really what it is. That's how at least I've approached it. That it's a study of human behavior, that how do consumers react? How do producers react? So at one level, it's that. But I'd say the thing about, which was the way that I studied economics maybe was a bit different because I didn't do too much formal economics training. My thing was, how do I apply economics to make money? So therefore, my defining profession, as you know, is one of an investor. I use economics as a tool. But for me, the whole thing was how to make money with it.
Can you break that down?
Yeah. So in terms of how do you invest in various economies, right? So in terms of the factor that you use economic knowledge, okay, what's happening to someone's economic growth rate, what's happening to inflation. But it's not, for me, unlike the other people you mentioned, they used it more for how to make economic policy. My thing was, how do I use that information to make money? Which country to bet on? Which country not to bet on? Which country's stock market to bet on, which country's stock market not to bet on, which currency is likely to do well, not to do well. So my thing was very clear. I want to use economics as a tool to try and make money. And also because I feel that that when you do that, then you have to be intellectually honest, right? Which is that I invest. I have a track record. People can see it. Investors can see it. So if I make mistakes, I can't hide anywhere. That, okay, this is what you said or this is what you did. This is your track record. So therefore, I'm also prepared, I guess, in some way to put myself up to such scrutiny, right? You mentioned about Pranay Roy. He's a legend in the news business. The reason is because I think that he also knows, and I know that for sure, that every year we do a show in which in which I go and give my forecast of what's going to happen that year. And then I'm willing to come back the next year and say, okay, what happened to my forecast? What were right and what was wrong? To many people, that appears, wow, that's scary, that you're putting a forecast and you're going out every year and going to be sort of evaluated on it. For me, I'm like, that's how I live my daily life. Every day, I'm an investor. I have a fund. I'm investing people's money. And I've done that now for over 25 years. So every day, I get a daily scorecard. How have I done? Have I made money? Have I lost money? I get a daily scorecard. Now, and so I'm used to having that. So it's like I'm in a daily exam.
Gotcha.
That's the way to think about in terms of what I do on a daily basis.
Fair to say that when economics meets the world of policy and politics, there'll always be a bit of a political filter added upon your economic predictions and economic viewpoints. Fair to say?
It's fair to say that, but I'm saying, but there's a difference when you're an investor.
No, gotcha.
That if you start to, get ideologically motivated, you're going to lose money.
Got it. So here, your career performance effectively is totally dependent on what you study and predict.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're open to view things extremely neutrally.
I'm forced to. Even if I don't want to.
This is what I loved about your work that already exists on the Indian internet.
Right.
My only issue with your work is that you're presented in a very, very formal light.
Okay.
And I feel that actually you're a chiller. You have a very human side as well, which is why I was very excited about speaking with you today. I think that you're going to give a very raw, neutral opinion on a bunch of subjects.
I hope so, yeah.
How do you separate your own human political lens from your work? There must be some level of your own life story, your own emotional viewpoints, your own political viewpoints that factor into your predictions.
Yeah.
And or I'm assuming that you've learned a way to segregate that side of your head into another compartment and you purely look at the numbers and what's best for profits.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's true even as far as India is concerned, right? So yeah, because you take the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In some regards, you have people who really love him, and then you have other people, who have a very negative view of him. For me, I have to separate the two things, right? Which is the fact that politically, I'm not a fan of anyone who does something to undermine the democracy of a country. I truly, at a personal level, I'm a like Democrat in a way, which is that I really believe in democracy. I really believe the fact that people should be given the freedom to say what they want, and they should not be scared or have any intimidation and stuff. So at some level, when these investigative agencies and other things have been used to go after, political rivals or to even go after people in the media, it personally pains me because that's not the India that I believe in. So that's the political view. Yet you have to separate that from the economic view. Most of my people who are in that camp will also see nothing right in that the government has done, which is that, for example, everything about the government is bad, that the government has sort of, led to massive unemployment and there's massive inflation and stuff. And then for me, it's like, from an economic perspective, I think the track record isn't that bad, right? Which is that you just look at the stuff that, basic things like inflation has behaved much better under the current government than it did under the previous government. Now, inflation is a very big deal. It's what, every day for the poor people and other people that it like matters. Similarly, I think that when this entire pandemic happened, there was a lot of pressure on the government to go and spend a lot of money to help the poor, to help like everybody in general. There was a lot of pressure to do that. I think that they did the right thing by resisting that pressure, that we are not going to go out and just spend it, because had they done it, then they could have put India's economic position in some jeopardy, because we don't have that kind of money to just go and keep spending and sort of being that sort of fiscally irresponsible as someone like the US may do or something. So I think so. So I think that, again, I have to separate the two. That I'd say the economic performance has been decent. Politically, I have a problem when there is a sort of, this targeting of people at a personal level. So again, as an investor, you have to separate the two. But I think that most of my journalist friends and media friends or other people that you possibly speak to, and I find it that they find very difficult to separate these two things.
I want to stop this podcast midway and high five you. I love the way you put this. And very few people have been able to articulate this exact feeling this well on this show. Where you're not dissing the government completely. You're just highlighting what you dislike.
Yeah.
But you're also looking at the mathematics.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, like the data is there, right? So let's look at that. Sure, the government can do a lot more and this can happen. But I think that I have to separate the political side and the economic side sometime. And that was true for China too for many years. Like, China for many years, in terms of the fact that it was, like a communist country at one level, led by this very strong authoritarian kind of regime at the center. Yet economically, it flourished in terms of what it did in that. Again, I'm not comparing the two. I think there are very, many differences, but I'm saying I've just been trained that way, that you got to separate the two. I mean, I've met people in the past. I've met the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. I've met the Turkish premier, like Erdoğan. And even there, I've seen that how these leaders have changed over time and at a personal level in terms of how they can be. And then you have to separate, because again, saying anything positive about either of them could sort of, make me lose all my friends in the media because of some. But at some point in time, then you have to also evaluate, what's their economic performance? Is it really bad? Is it really good? So I think that as a investor, you're trained that if you don't do that, then you're going to end up sort of losing money. And if you end up losing money, that is for me the single biggest sort of hit that I can take because I have to put my money where my mouth is.
I'm already very excited about the rest of this conversation. What I definitely want to ask you is if you're familiar with Dhruv Rathi's videos.
Yeah.
You are?
Yes.
Now let's place Dhruv Rathi at one. I would actually place him at one end of the spectrum.
Right.
Because I think he has strong views and I respect him as a content creator, but I do place him at one end of the spectrum.
Yes.
And then at the other end, I'd probably place, I don't know, any of the Indian news channels.
Exactly.
Fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I can't think of a news channel. NDTV used to be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, maybe on... For the sake of conversation, let's call it left and right.
Right.
Dhruv Rathi, extreme left?
Yeah.
Please correct me if you...
Well, I don't know if, like this right and left, I'm a bit, but you can say that, like people like Dhruv Rathi and all that, you can argue, or, like even people like Ravish Kumar, who are very popular phenomenon, they're at one end of the spectrum in terms of the fact. Left, right, I'm not sure, who I would call left and right, because I think it's all I'm grown up to thinking left and right in economic terms.
Okay.
That for me, left in economic terms mean people who want much more government and people on right who want much less government. That's the economic. But in political terms, you're right. I think let's just put it that these people are very anti the current government. And then you have a whole bunch of these, people, like the traditional news, mainstream news media, where most of them are on the very pro-government narrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to openly say it. It's anti-BJP, pro-BJP.
Sure. It's the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a friend of mine, Shreya Ghodawat, has this quote that she had shared with me. She said that if you're on either of the extremes, it's actually like a horseshoe. You're closer to each other than you are distant.
Okay.
Because you have opinions that do contain a filter of your own emotions and your own political opinion as a human being.
Yes.
Which is okay because I guess you're in media and you're entitled to express your own human side as a part of your creativity, which in this case is reporting upon the government.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that Dhruv Rathi is completely right. And I don't believe that the traditional news media in our country is completely right.
Correct.
And the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because I don't understand economics as much as you do, the direct question to you is, can the truth of the performance of the current government be determined completely by the numbers? Is that a yes?
Well, I'd say that apart from numbers, it's also what you see, right? In terms of the fact that what numbers. Now, some people argue the numbers are doctored and this and the other. But I think it's about what you experience, what you travel.
Yes.
In terms of what you see in India. Has India changed in 5-10 years? Of course it's changed.
Let's break down this thought a little more. It's about what you see. It's about the numbers which may or may not be manipulated.
Yeah.
a third factor I'd put in is it's also about what general chatter you hear when you speak to people from different parts of society.
Yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to factor in?
No, I think that it's that. And as I said, that once again, there is the objective numbers. For example, what are some of the objective numbers, right?
Sure.
There's numbers the government releases, which you can sort of think, I mean, like have issues with. But then again, I go back to my role as an investor. I meet companies. These companies are reporting real like revenue numbers, like this company, what was the growth rate? What were, in terms of, it's a consumer company. It's directly interfacing with the consumer, or it's got to do with some company that's building infrastructure in the country. So you get to see the real numbers. And then you have to see those numbers and see in terms of how well is India doing also from that perspective. And so therefore, I think that is another lens that I think we should add to these various factors.
I want you to expand on this exact narrative that we're speaking about right now.
Yeah.
The only tiny question I'll throw at you before you begin the expansion is that we had a political commentator who was anti-BJP on the show.
Yeah.
He said that whatever growth you see in India would have happened even if the Congress was there, because the growth is an outcome of the population and its own growth. And then I've posed this question to different people. The people who are anti-BJP agree with him.
Yeah.
The people who are pro-BJP say that no, it depends on who is in a position of power.
Yeah.
Those people and their policies will dictate the growth of a country. When it comes to this question, I agree with the pro-BJP people. In terms of the people who are sitting in the Lok Sabha, the current leaders of the country do decide where the country goes.
Yeah.
So can you explain this answer first? Like, could you answer this question?
Yeah, sure. So I think there is no debate for me in my head. And I wrote about this even when I published my first book, Breakout Nations, that the previous government, especially in the second term, what was called the UPA, their economic track record was dismal. Was, like in terms of that, what they did. In terms of, if you look at the amount of spending that went out of control, if you look at the inflation that happened, I think, and also the fact that the vulnerability of our external position, the rupee and everything, that the second term in particular was a very bad track record. In fact, in many ways, the reason for the current government and the rise of Modi was because the track record of that government, particularly in the second term, was so bad. So I think that like this idea that no matter who's in power, something will happen, I think is too simplistic a view. I've seen many countries also do very well for a time, and then some wrong leader comes and then they can destroy the country. So the effect of leadership does matter. But as I said, all these debates have to be nuanced because even the previous government, the Congress government, there were some very good spells also when it did, for example, the 1990s economic reforms were launched by the Congress government after all, in terms of what it did. Now, of course, it happened under pressure. We had no choice because we were out of money. So we were forced to do some steps, but the reforms were there. So therefore, I think that the narrative when, like the fact that the last 60 years were all a, terrible era. And then the last 10 years have been all the other way. I think there's some nuances to that too. That yes, there's no doubt that the second term of the previous government was terrible. And that's what laid the ground for the BJP and Mr. Modi's rise. And in terms of what they have done over the last 10 years, there have been a couple of big mistakes they too have made. I was very against demonetization. I think that was a mistake. I also felt the fact that in the initially, the very hard lockdown, everyone's got to remain home, we can't do anything, etc., was also a bit draconian. But generally, especially in the second term of this government, I'd say the economic policy has broadly been sensible, and that has helped. That has helped, and that shows up in terms of the stock market's performance as well. And that's there. So I think that it's broadly been okay. The economic performance in the second term in particular of this government, I think, has been much better than the economic performance of, let's say, the UPA in its second term. So that distinction has to be made. But yet, I don't agree with this narrative that the last 60, because even if you look at India's, like one of my favorite charts I do about India is this one. One of the favorite things about India, that when India got its independence back in 1947, our ranking, if you look at it in the world, right, was like in terms of, we were a very poor country in terms of what we inherited and our ranking, but many of the countries were poor. the big thing was that for the next, after that, right up until the 1980s, India's ranking remained low or kept slipping, whereas so many other countries overtook us and did so well. Even including, that China and India, their per capita income level, which is that, how much each person earns every day in these countries was equal till the 1980s. And then after that today, China today is 5 times richer than India is today. So it's like it was equal to the 1980s. Today, China is 5 times richer than we are. So in terms of the fact is that, yes, India's economic performance right up until the 1980s was like very poor, I would say. Then you had the economic reforms in the early 1990s, which helped to start lift India up. But China took off even in a greater way. But there's no doubt that a lot was done in those few years, in the early 1990s as well, of economic reforms and what the government back then did. So again, as I said, these debates have to be nuanced, in terms of that. And I'm trying to do that here because the easy solution is to say good and bad.
Is there any way you can answer the following question in a very short way? Because I actually want to stick to this current government and current election theme.
Yeah.
But there must have been a J-curve moment for China. Like China would have exploded after the 80s.
Yes.
What were the factors that went into that rise?
Very simple. The government kept getting out of the way, which is that when China was a very government, it was a communist controlled government, and also the government was very much in your lives. You couldn't own land in China. You couldn't own property in China. Everything was controlled by the government right till the 1970s. And China was an economic basket case. Then under Deng Xiaoping, he's a very famous leader, they began to open up. And they gave people more and more freedom. From a very tight control, they gave people more and more economic freedom. They didn't give people political freedom. So you could not vote and you could not do any of that. But they gave people economic freedom. Much more than, in fact, the Indian government gave to Indians. And that's, for me, is one of the big contradictions, like for me, which is we called ourselves a democracy. We gave people lots of political freedom. Okay, you can vote the way you want to. We did not give people economic freedom. There was so much licenses, regulation, you can invest there, you can't invest there, you can't take your money there, you can't do that. We were completely throttled as economic citizens of this country, even though we got a lot of political freedom. You can vote. China did the opposite. They told people, hey, we have all the power in terms of politically, you can't speak against us and you can't, in terms of go and vote, but we're going to keep giving you more economic freedom. And they got so much foreigners to come into their country. And they invited foreign investment and said to all the leading multinationals, you come to China, you tell us what you want. We'll make it work for you. So, I think that there's this contrast that people don't quite know. And the way they did that was quite impressive. They invited foreigners to come and help them manage their companies, to come in terms of invest wherever they wanted. So all the McDonald's and Coke and all, they first arrived in China and they got a complete red carpet that come and do what you feel like in our country. So we have to think of it very differently in terms of what China did and what India did. And India was much slower in giving its people such economic freedom.
Is 2020s India, 1990s China?
In some ways, yes. Economically, yes. But again, I think that the only difference here is that China, in fact, did a lot more than what we have done so far.
For example?
In terms of creating the environment for business to do well. In terms of that, there was a complete red carpet for business. I think in this country, even the government sometimes I feel almost looks at Indian businessmen somewhat as being a bunch of crooks or something. And there's in terms of it. And I feel that this whole fear of what the investigative agencies can come and knock on your door and do all that, I think that hurts business sentiment somewhat. So in some ways, it's true that the China of the 1990s, you can compare India, is similar. I feel very optimistic about India's growth for the next 10, 15 years. But I will still caution, having seen what China did a lot more. And China was a lot more ruthless that way. Like in India, for example, we still feel that the poor need to be given a lot of subsidies. They need to be given a lot of help and stuff. That even Mr. Modi, he's been very reluctant to change some of the Congress policies like, the college, for example, of giving people farm in terms of loans, or even sort of the Manrega, right, which is in terms of giving people employment, which the government provides if you can't get employment and stuff. China did nothing like that. They told its poor people, you either work or too bad. We're not going to support you in some way. So it was a very ruthless form of what they did. And that's what sort of created the productivity boom and stuff to do. We have not done what China has done. So it's such an important distinction in terms of how ruthless China was. And here we are still, very cautious about what we do. And even this government, you called it right wing, but from an economic perspective, I think it's more centrist. It's not done anything to change the land or the labor laws or something the way China did. We haven't done that as yet.
Okay. Perhaps it's a little more empathetic, our government, towards the lower rungs of society. China wasn't as empathetic, but then that forced everyone to either fade away, or get the best version of themselves to the forefront and make money for their families.
Yes.
I don't think we'll ever see that in India, though.
Yes.
Because the fabric of our society is very emotional.
Absolutely correct.
Right?
Yes. So therefore, I'm very careful about when you say China and India are the same thing. But you're so correct. This feeling the social fabric of a country is very important. And, China was able to do it. It's also because China is a very homogeneous society. We are a very diverse society. And that in terms of the way that one part of India thinks is so different from another part of India thinks. I travel in India a lot. And when I go from one state to another, the moment you cross the border, all of a sudden the narrative changes, how people think changes, their eating habits change, the culture changes. In China, you don't have that. China, it's much more sort of homogeneous. Everywhere you go in China is a lot more similar. In India's case, we are so diverse. So that's part of the reason why for, us to go down that path is possibly very difficult and may never happen.
I also assume it's because the Communist Party in China was very sure that they'd be in power even after such brutal policy making. If an Indian government does the same thing, their election chances are at risk.
You can argue that, but my feeling is that even in India, when we do that, so many governments still lose elections. I just try, for example, you go to places and the Congress tried that too, give a lot of freebies, do that, they still lost elections, right? I mean, even now, in terms of, I was traveling in Andhra Pradesh, where Jagan Reddy is the chief minister. He is known as the king of freebies. He's given lots of freebies to his people. And Chandrababu Naidu, who's his main opposition figure, he's sort of seen as more pro-development, almost being pro. But even though Jagan Reddy has given people so many freebies, I came back feeling that he could still lose the election. So India's a much more complicated story, that you do X and you think you'll get Y. But the whole idea is that this is a much more complicated country. China is in fact, that way a simpler country to understand than India.
Okay. Getting back to 2020's India.
Yeah.
We were talking about the current government and their economic performance in general. So you scan the last 10 years. It's not as good as the Modi government would claim that it is.
Yes.
And it's definitely not as bad as, I love you Dhruv, but as Dhruv Rathi would claim it is.
Right.
Right? And yeah. I'm using the name Dhruv Rathi because honestly his page has exploded on the Indian internet in the last 1 year. And kudos to his bravery, kudos to him putting his opinion out. But I've heard other YouTubers say this behind closed doors as well, that not all the facts and figures that Dhruv presents are completely accurate. There could be some level of confirmation bias. And I hate calling this anti-BJP side of the spectrum the Dhruv Rathi spectrum, but I almost call it that out of respect for him, because he's the only guy who's publicly...
Well, there are others, but I think that's a very important phenomenon which is happening, which I think is a good thing for, at some level, this is good for Indian democracy, right? Because if the entire mainstream media is being sort of, controlled by the government and its narrative, at least it's good that these alternatives are sprouting there.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes a democracy. So it's, as I said, it's Dhruv Rathi, it's Ravish Kumar, it's all these YouTubers who, like in terms of who have come and done that. So at least that's as I said, that at least for Indian democracy, I feel that that's a positive. Imagine just hearing one narrative. That would be a terrible thing.
And what's the difference between us and North Korea?
Yeah, exactly. So,
At least from a media perspective.
that's right. So you want alternative narratives, you want that to happen. And the problem I find is that often that when you try and say something nuanced, both sides hate you.
Yeah.
So
I do believe that's changing. So I think there is a market for nuanced conversation to be had.
right,
It's why I have a bit of a career now
right.
from that perspective
Exactly. Yeah.
as well.
So there's a demand for something different. Otherwise, like in terms of seeing the news channels and seeing the same people fight with each other, but being made to fight and yet have anchors who are very biased.
Do you still watch Indian news?
No, absolutely not.
I know for a fact that you probably hang out with like the smartest people, the cream of the crop. Do they watch the news?
I think that everybody wants to watch the news, but I think they've quite put off by what they see on television, to be honest. So I think that's at least the people that I sort of speak to, I think that if they watch it, they do it secretly because no one wants to admit to it anymore because it's become sort of that, crass at some level.
If you meet someone who says that they watch the news regularly, what do you make of their opinions?
I'd say that people, in terms of, I don't see too many people who say that, but I'd say that now it depends what's news, as I said, that the form of news has changed. When my travels now, so many people consume their news through social media. They don't consume the news. We grew up as a generation when news for us meant watching a 9 o'clock news where someone told you in half an hour that this is what's going, this is what's happening across India and the world. That's the news that we grew up on. It's dramatically changed today. People today sort of are consuming news in this very shorter things. They're getting stuff from social media. People are posting all sorts of stuff there. And, people aren't going the traditional way in terms of how they are watching the news. So there's a massive shift as far as the media is concerned. But even in the media, there are, let's also call out people who are trying to do it like in a neutral way. Like there are newspapers such as like even the Indian Express, which are trying to do things in a like neutral way in terms of that. Like in terms of in India for the last 30 years, I've written for the Times of India on its, edit page and stuff like that. I still write roughly what I feel like and stuff. So there are still pockets out there where you can do the right stuff. But I think in general, the big disappointment is the fact that on TV news, if you watch it, that feels as if it's just very biased and, it's very propaganda based mostly. But even on TV news, there are a couple of anchors who try and do something different. But
Feel free to drop names.
No, I'd say that people like, I'd say like on India Today TV, for example, you have people like Rajdeep and Rahul Kanwal and all who try and sort of, present something a bit different. So those are people I'm happy having conversations with as well when I can.
How do they feel about the same conversation about TV news?
I think that everyone knows what's happening deep down, but I think that there are lots of people who are trying to present some balance. And my, of course, respect is huge for people like Pranoy and Radhika Roy, that even after they sort of, had to part with NDTV, they have launched their own platform now, like called Decoder, where they are putting out very data-based election coverage. So you can go there, you can have a look at the data and you can make up your mind. Okay, this is right, this is not right. So I think that there are pockets of that happening and I feel very good about that's still happening. So I tend to be a bit more optimistic. Let's put it this way. So when I meet people, I know that, like I can feel a lot of despair, especially among my liberal friends about the state of this country. And sometimes it consumes me too. I also get very depressed, especially when something happens to some close friends of mine and they're targeted, like by the agencies and stuff. It really depresses me, to be honest. But at least the fact that these, people are there with the spirit, with the courage to say stuff, to do that and provide a balance, I think is great and something which I still have hope for as far as the country is concerned.
Okay. As far as the country is concerned, the truth lies in the numbers.
Okay. Yeah.
Fair?
Yeah, but I say that numbers, but also in terms of a feeling for it. Like you experience it and stuff. Like one of the things which, my favorite week of the year, which is that I'm based in New York. I come to India, 3-4 times a year, and I travel a lot. For me, travel is my sort of real passion and hobby. That's what I love doing. I love traveling. My favorite week of the year is that I formed a group about 25 years ago. And the group is, became about 20 of us. And the only criteria was that everyone has to be from the media. That either a writer or someone who's a TV person and all that, with a deep interest in Indian politics. So I formed a group like that. There are 20 of us. We have, over the last 25 years or so, done 32 election trips of India. These are journeys of India. What do we mean by election trips? Every time there is a national election, obviously, or a major state election in any year, we go out and spend nearly a week on the road, traveling from point A to point B, trying to figure out what is happening in this country. So it's a journey of India. I wrote a book about that in 2019 called Democracy on the Road, which chronicled these travels of mine in India. So that's my single favorite week of the year.
Why?
Because for me, I feel so connected to India. And for me, I get a feel for what's happening in India. And the further away I go from Delhi or even Bombay, the more optimistic I feel about India. Because you feel less of this kind of polarization, hostility, when you sort of go out there and you speak to people, and the warmth of the average Indian is something which you bask in, and you see that. So I just finished such a trip. This was in fact my 32nd election trip because of the elections which are going on. This time I decided on a very unusual route, but it was over 8 days. We traveled virtually coast to coast, from the east coast to the west coast. So we started the journey in Vijayawada, just off the coast of Andhra Pradesh. And we drove for 2,000 kilometers over 8 days and ended the journey in Mumbai over these 8 days. And so now when you go out and you speak to people and stuff, it's much more about data. Then it's about, what are people really thinking? What are they telling you? Most people, when I come back from these trips, only have one question for me. What's your number? They just want to know who's winning, who's losing. And for me, it's like, I'm getting to meet all these people along the way. So like the typical day on these trips is what? We try and see some election rally of some major leader out there. We then try and meet those leaders backstage. It's organized and stuff. We try and meet them backstage, have a frank off-the-record conversation with them. Then we stop at different villages or different places which we think are important, especially politically, and speak to people. And we have to explain to people that, we are not party workers. We're just journalists and patrakars, as we call them, that हम सिर्फ पत्रकार हैं, आपसे पूछने आए हैं कि इधर माहौल क्या है, क्या हो रहा है, and all that. So we speak to people then, try and understand what the concerns are.
This is anyone. You'll meet someone at a dhaba.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So like every hour or so, we'll try and stop along the way to try and talk to these people. We'll get off and do that. And then we come back to our hotel or wherever we can stay, which is all organized. And then for dinner, I try and typically put together a group of that cities. Let's say we stopped in Aurangabad. I will, in terms of try and make a request to someone who's traveling on a group or someone who knows, to try and help us put together who the leading people in Aurangabad are, from the leading journalists, stringers, or so we call them, the leading industrialists, civil society people. Try and call them for dinner, and then have a frank conversation around dinner with them about what they feel about the politics of that region, about who's winning, who's losing, how's Aurangabad really doing, what industry is doing well, what's not doing. So that's the typical pattern of these trips. So we're on the road for more than 12 hours a day. And these are like, literally 14 to 16 hour days. From the time you get up in the morning, right up until time you finish dinner, we are fully consumed. So I feel I'm fully consumed in India.
How many such trips have you completed?
As I said, 32.
32.
Yeah, so we just finished our 32nd trip. And data is one thing, but this experience of traveling in India this way for a week, virtually 1 week every year, sometimes we've done 2 trips a year. I'd say that these 32 weeks of mine that I've done over the last 25 years, for me, have been my favorite travel experiences and my favorite week, I'd say. And once the trips are over, we all get withdrawal symptoms. Because apart from the great conversations we have, even these 20 people, just sort of hearing their views, and that stimulates conversation. We're sitting, like in these mini vans, and we're chatting with each other. There are about 7 of us in each car, let's say, or van. And, those are very stimulating conversations. And you're debating everything. I think that's really what sort of motivates me.
I have 3 questions for you, of which one question might piss you off. So I'm going to ask you that first.
Sure.
The first question is, ab ki baar 400 par?
I don't think so.
Do you want to expand on it a little bit right now?
Yeah, in terms of, very briefly, when I traveled on this route, the feeling I got is that this time I did not see any big wave, right? That in the past elections, there was a wave which was happening. In 2014, it was the Modi wave, the freshness of him coming to power, the disgust with the UPA regime. There was a wave. In the end, he ended up getting more seats than what we forecast, but still, 2019, I think the election seemed to go very close when it started. And then I think you had, the Pulwama, Balakot and all those episodes. And that really led to a big nationalistic surge where people wanted to back a strong leader to come back to power, like in an environment like that. And they were quite, charged with the way that India had responded to what had happened. This time when I went out there, I felt that there's no resentment against Modi either. So people are like, fine, because they see him as the only alternative in many places, but there's no great wave either. There's no real. So what happened is that people have started to focus back on local issues, local candidates. Who's our local candidate? What has he done for us in terms of that? So it's gone back to that. In the past, what we would call is that, in fact, when I was thinking about this trip, about 4-6 weeks ago, I started thinking about this trip. I thought this is going to be the most predictable election ever, right? After having done all these election trips, because at that point in time, it seemed that whatever number Modi sets or the BJP sets, they will hit, because they were on such a roll. It seemed, there was so much about like positive, and the Ram temple had been done and they had won the big state elections. It seemed that way, that's the case. But I think once the campaign has begun, the feeling I get is that that wave has ebbed a bit. So there's no resentment, but people still want to focus on local issues. Back then, it seemed it almost seemed like it's a lamppost election. What do you mean by lamppost election? It basically means that even if Modi put a lamppost, in terms of in each constituency, they would vote. I think there's been some change in that. I don't think the change is enough for him to lose, because I still feel that he's got a very strong base, particularly among women. And this is one of the contradictions I try and explain to my friends in the West. A lot of my women friends in the West, I live in New York, and especially Indian, they think of Modi as almost, or the entire BJP as this very sort of male chauvinistic, almost misogynistic, kind of figure or party. But yet there's another side, which is that because that his support base amongst the women seems quite powerful, because a lot of people, they get the free rations. The delivery system is improved because of, the digitization. People get the benefits much more directly and stuff like that. So I think that those kind of things is what builds his base up also. So I think that it's that kind of strange election, which is that it doesn't seem like a wave, yet you have a leader with a strong base. So it's the logical conclusion to me seems is that just based on our travels is the fact that he comes back to power, but possibly with not as big a number as he had expected, or even as last time. I think that is my base case. But remember that it's calling Indian elections, as you know, is fraught with massive risks. Every 1% change in the vote, 1% can change your seats by 15 seats.
Break down this concept.
Yeah. So like, for example, let's say the BJP, this is in fact some stuff which was taught to me by people like Pranoy Roy and Dorab Supariwala, who are such great pollsters and, have been so in the past. That let's say that the BJP's, has 35% vote share. I'm saying hypothetically, what analysis showed is that the vote share of the BJP goes from, in very simple terms, I'm telling you, if the BJP's vote share goes from 35 to, let's say, 33, this is all hypothetical, the number of seats they win could go down by 20-30. If the BJP's vote share goes up by a similar amount, the number of seats that they win could similarly go up by, up to 30 seats or so. So now when you're traveling, how do you just be able to predict this 1% swing. And yet the verdict will be so different if the BJP, let's say, has around 300 seats today. If the BJP's, let's say slips to, let's say 270, I think a lot of people will see that as a pretty diminished mandate. That, yeah, he's coming back, but he's been diminished. On the other hand, if the BJP hits 330, then I think a lot of people will say he's got the complete support of the people to do what he feels like. Right? I mean, I think that most people would interpret the results that way. And what is it all hanging on? 2% here or 2% there. So that makes it so difficult, therefore, to predict, but we can still, it's fun. So treat it like a game, like a sport at some level, even though it has very serious consequences at some level about how this happens.
Okay. That was only the first question based on your travels.
Yeah.
The next two questions.
Yeah.
Could you give me your top 5 learnings in all these years? How many years has it been?
25 years.
25 years.
Of 32 trips, yeah.
Top 5 learnings about India in 25 years of doing these trips. And then the top 5 learnings of India in 2024.
Sure. So if I think about some of my top learnings of having done these trips, one for me is the fact that, every, we have, whatever, 28 states or whatever, 29, depending on how you count them. Every time you cross one state border, just how the conversation totally shifts, how the characters shift, and how no one state leader is able to have any appeal even in the state next to it. Like, I remember like in UP, it would always appeal that you have, you had Mulayam Singh Yadav, now you have Akhilesh Yadav. There in UP, you cross the border to Bihar, just the next door, and they will have zero appeal there, right? So it's fascinating. Similarly, Lalu or Tejaswi, if they cross the border from UP to Bihar the other way, their appeal totally diminishes. And there's been no regional leader in India, Sharad Pawar and others have tried, who have been able to break out of their own state. They have their own state, that's it. Even Mr. Modi, he was seen to be very associated with Gujarat, but he needed the backing of the BJP and the RSS as a national organization to reach where he is. But it is impossible in this country, it seems, for any state leader organically to break out of their stronghold. That's one. The second sort of learning that I had also, like in here, as I said, is that the further you go from Delhi or Bombay, you figure out the conversation is so different. It's very different. Their concerns are much more local. We in Delhi, Bombay are thinking about Indian democracy and what's happening to it and all these things. And they themselves are going there and they are thinking about what is in it for me, what's my self-interest, who's giving me what in terms of that, what do I feel like doing? They're not concerned with all these intellectual debates which are going on there. Even things like, it struck me that even things like pollution, it's such a big thing in Delhi, right? Like you go there and it is terrible. And this is one of the downsides, I guess. You go out of Delhi, the pollution levels haven't changed. You go to even a Lucknow or other places, but people just take it for granted. So they don't end up, caring for that. So it's just about how the conversations in these very big cities is so different from what's happening. The third thing I'd say is the fact that just every time you go, just how much India keeps changing. Like you go now to the smallest towns in India, you will have fitness centers, you will have salons, like out there, you will have beauty centers, just how much that has totally changed. Then the quality of hotels also, we have stayed in hotels, which I'd say that in terms of have been quite telling, like in terms of that now, most places in India you at least get some decent place to stay. In terms of that, which is like changed compared to what it was. And in the past, in terms of, I've been to places like Betia in the heart of Champaran and all that in Bihar. And I've stayed in places which at best can be described as a vertical dhaba, which is out there, right? So it's there. And with like, of course, with chipkalis falling from the ceiling and bugs in your beds, and you did. I think that now even those towns have become so different and stuff. So in that way, India has changed. But in one very key aspect, India has not changed, which is that the time it takes me to go from point A to point B. Let's say I'm going from Vijayawada to Hyderabad. I'm going from, let's say, Nashik to Mumbai and stuff. The average speed to go from point to point, house to house, is still 50 kilometers an hour. In 25 years, this has not changed.
Even after Nitin Gadkari?
Yeah, because like in fact we met him on this trip as well, and I asked him this question that he said, listen, I'm responsible for the national highways, and the national highways are all very good, which is true. But he said, I'm not responsible for the state highways or inside the city when you go, what happens to the congestion and the traffic and stuff. So so it's true on the national highway, but you go to the state highways or you go to often like city to city, the congestion is, and there's so much development along the way. It keeps slowing things down. There's always construction going on. I just drove from Nashik to Mumbai. It just like, I did it after 20 years. I'd done the same route 20 years ago. The time taken to go is exactly the same. There's always construction going on. It's always as if demand in India is always ahead of supply. So that just hasn't changed for all this time.
Is this because the state governments are making money?
No. I just feel that it's so much development always going on and demand is ahead of supply that it just doesn't keep up, right? So like you go, there's always construction going on somewhere, or if you hit a city, the things slow down, or the intercity thing is slowed down. Like even in Delhi, they've built this great highway, like on the Jaipur, like to go to Jaipur. The moment you hit Gurgaon, from Gurgaon to get to, let's say, my parents' home near Chanakyapuri in Delhi, it takes 1.5 hours. So the time, it's, as a kid, my grandmother and my great-grandparents used to live in Jaipur. So we used to go a lot. Those days also, to go from around Chanakyapuri to their home in Vivekanand Marg in Jaipur would take about 5 hours, with one stop. Today, the time it takes is roughly the same, even though the distance in the middle you can speed. But the time it takes from the time you enter the outskirts of Jaipur to get to your home, of the time it takes from Gurgaon to get to your home, makes up for all the time that you have gained on the expressway. So anywhere you go, I find that you have to average 50 kilometers an hour as the speed you take for granted. So I'd say that so these are some of the learnings. But the other thing I also find is the great warmth in India, which I don't find in other places, and even the sense of security that I feel in India. Like one thing which really strikes me is that a lot of people ask me that you're 20 of you people. Some of the people are even, well recognized, and some of them, like in terms of are well heeled, so to speak. Do you ever carry bodyguards and security with you? I'm saying that, no, I don't do that. Now in other countries I know, like in a Brazil or a South Africa, I would have to do that in terms of that. And the one other point I'll make about India is that when you go out there, I know that we love to sit here and we love to be sort of, keep talking about our leaders being so bad and our leaders being, sort of corrupt and all that. But when I go and meet, like, some of these leaders, there are two emotions I get. One, that you feel that when you meet the leaders one-on-one, that they're very charming. That they know how to charm you a lot. They're very good. And some level also feel that they are truly, really hardworking in terms of that. And one thing about India, which always fascinates me, is how if you look at many of the leaders in India, starts with, like Narendra Modi, but even many of the state chief ministers, many of them tend to be single and unmarried. And a lot of, I think, is that they're just totally devoted to the life and politics. And that's all they care. That's all they live and breathe. And there's very little scope for personal time. And as you know, in the case of Rahul Gandhi or even Akhilesh, if they take a vacation abroad, they get a lot of flack for doing that. Because in India, politics is considered a 24/7 job. The leaders have to be available on tap. They have to come to the constituency. If someone important's wedding is happening, they got to be there in terms of that. So it's a very consuming job out there. So I know there are a lot of negative things we can say about them, but having met them and having done all this, you also feel a bit of empathy or something about, some positivity also when doing this.
Okay. You also have to brief us on what you learned about 2024, other than what I asked you within the first question.
Yeah.
So you're saying definitely not 400 par. It's almost
nothing is definitely, but that's my feeling. Yeah.
It's almost unpredictable.
Okay.
What else?
Again, I think that the fact is that, as I said, that we traveled through 4 states. We hit 4 states. We did Andhra Pradesh. We did Telangana. We briefly touched into Karnataka as we drove through. And then we spent 3 days at the end in Maharashtra. Again, how in every state, the narrative is very different in terms of what the concerns are or even who the leaders are. Andhra Pradesh, for example, it is really Jagan and Chandrababu Naidu. The national parties don't matter. Congress is completely irrelevant in Andhra Pradesh. The BJP is very small, and it is piggybacking on the back of Chandrababu Naidu and the film star there, Pawan Kalyan. We went to a rally of Modi's when we were in Andhra Pradesh. It was scorching heat. I don't think I've experienced heat in India like that at 3:30 in the afternoon, to sort of go to a rally of Narendra Modi. Very interesting that Pawan Kalyan, the big regional film star, he spoke in Telugu. When he spoke in Telugu and he spoke, the crowds were like crazy. The moment he finished speaking, in terms of that, people started leaving. Even though you had Mr. Modi out there. And the issue is that Modi had to speak in Hindi, but there was a constant translation happening in Telugu. So that connect doesn't build. Compared to, let's say, when he's, like in UP or somewhere and speaking in Hindi, and he's at that sort of, his, he's such a strong speaker, and that he's able to connect and that shout and call with the audience is happening, you don't get that effect out there. So just again about the regionalization. And it's all, the entire thing is, in fact, when we spoke to voters in Andhra Pradesh, no one even asked us about some Modi or Rahul Gandhi. There was no conversation about them. The whole conversation was their concerns, and the leaders were Jagan Reddy, Chandrababu Naidu. Very clear as far as Andhra Pradesh. Now we enter Telangana. Again, very different. We had a meeting with Revant Reddy, the chief minister there now in Telangana. And it's like amazing to see that this is the new generation of the Congress at some level, which is that he was like, as he put it for us. I mean, one of the memorable quotes he gave me is, ideologies for the libraries. Saying that, listen, we are here, we are fighting. We are not here about, whose ideology is what, left, right, whatever. It's all practical in terms of what it is. And he was also referring to the BJP. In this election, one of the things which has really been very remarkable is that if you look at the BJP, 25% of all candidates that the BJP has put up in this election have come from other parties. That's quite a telling number. 25%. Imagine the BJP's put up near to 400 candidates. 100 of those have recently come from other parties. So it just tells you that this ideology is how we think about it. But even the BJP, the Congress and all are very practical, especially at the ground level. Whoever, wants to come to our side, we'll take in terms of whoever is going to help us win. So out there. So you got the practical thing of politics out there, and also the fact that I think that in Telangana, it's become a race. The Congress is on the ascendant. It's doing all of a sudden. Remember, the Congress in Telangana 2 years ago was seen as a complete wipeout. In 2 years' time, it's gone from being a wipeout to first winning government. And in this election, it seems as if the Congress in Telangana at least is going to get the largest number of seats. And number 2 to Telangana is going to be the BJP. The regional party there, the BRS, is getting wiped out. So interesting that in Andhra Pradesh, 0 national parties. Telangana, right next to it, it's Congress and BJP as the 2 main parties now. Same thing in Karnataka. It's the Congress and the BJP who are slugging it out. And the JDS seems to have got wiped out there. So common theme we picked up, even though every state is different, is that in some of these states, the BJP's, apart from Andhra Pradesh, the BJP's allies aren't doing well, more than even the BJP. And in Maharashtra we came, there's so much confusion in this state. No one knows, who's with who, what's happening, even to get people to explain. When we ask them, कि आपका candidate कौन है? हाँ, वो है, उस party से है, and all this. There's so much candidate confusion out there that in this state, my best bet is it's going to be 50-50. That half here, half there. And there's some sympathy, I think, also for people like Uddhav Thackeray, Sharad Pawar, because there's this sort of thing of betrayal, कि उनके साथ विश्वासघात हुआ है. So I think that kind of feeling you got a bit out there. So that's very interesting to see these different narratives in these 4 states play itself out.
Okay. Because of the rise in numbers that we see in digital media, my assumption has always been that the internet is starting to reach the pockets of India where television could not have reached in some ways. Do you sense that the internet reaching these pockets of India affects the vote of the average voter there? The first-time voter, for example. Or generally even the older voters. Another way of asking this question is, are people getting more informed because of the internet?
No, absolutely, but more informed. I mean, politically, of course, it's there, but even commercially, right? I mean, these small villages I go to, and people are ordering online packages, on like these domestic apps and stuff like that. People in villages.
Does this affect the elections
E-commerce.
at all?
I'm not sure how it affects it, because I think, but I think that the issue is that the importance of traditional news, the way we consume it, has gone down a lot. So you feel that that people are getting the news from so many sources, but the downside, obviously, is there's a lot of scope for fake stuff to also do well in this, and fake narratives to build through that. But yeah, I'd say the consumption of news in the traditional way has, in terms of that, has gone down a lot, and people are now getting news from various sources. I'm not sure how it affects the outcome, but yeah, I think that people, in terms of the fact that there's much more scope, therefore, all these disruptors you mentioned about Dhruv Rathis of the world, much more scope for that to happen. Much more scope for people like you, in terms of who are coming at it from non-traditional media platforms, to happen. I mean, 10 years ago, in terms of if you wanted, or when I started out and stuff like that, being on NDTV with Prannoy Roy was like the ultimate thing to be. Now you go to these places and it's like different platforms, who to be, what to do in terms of that is so different. I mean, I have a new book coming out. I have to try and promote it. All of a sudden, I'm noticing how different I have to go, and who all I have to, who are the real influencers you have to speak to today compared to what you did. So I think it's changed the way it works, but I'm not sure it's influencing the outcome, is the short answer.
The outcomes are dependent on local issues.
Very much. I mean, I'd say local issues, and also, people are what's in it for me? I think that's very much the question. I mean, I feel that especially of the younger generation, they're like, okay, what's in it for me in terms of that? Okay, if Modi is sort of helping me directly, yeah, I'll go. If he's not, then I'm going to focus on my local candidate.
Even non-Hindu voters?
I don't know about that. I think that we keep hearing these theories about the fact that there's a lot of Muslim vote consolidation which is happening and stuff like that, which may be happening in terms of it. But I feel that there it's a very different feeling, right? Because of the fact that if they feel they're being, targeted, then it becomes almost existential for them that we need to do something to do that. But I think they're doing it very quietly, because I think that a lot of Muslim voters also understand that they say things too loudly and stuff like that. I think that's what happened in 2019 sometimes. It almost leads to a consolidation of the Hindu vote. So I think that whatever is happening, so I think that's one thing we're noticing. It's a much quieter election in terms of how people are behaving.
Generally, with the Muslims, Christians, and I'd also probably say the Buddhists that you meet on your travels, what's the sentiment towards the BJP?
No, I think that they're very clear in terms of who they're voting for, which is that whoever's can check the BJP, they're voting that way. I think that's very clear in terms of that. So, I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes you ask people what's the name, and once they reveal the name, it tells you two things about them. It tells you about their, in terms of their religion. It tells you them about the caste. So often, one thing I've learned, you would ask me what I've learned over these years, so often that is a good predictor of how they're going to vote.
Oh.
Unfortunately.
90% of the time?
Not 90, yeah, but pretty high. The moment you know that, you know which way they're going to vote. That's one thing we have learned over years.
So your vote is decided by your religion?
No, into religion or even caste, right?
Or
both
caste.
of this. But the key thing that Modi's been able to do in the last 10 years is that there's a small swing voter, right? That voter he's been able to attract by saying that I'm doing something to, here in this way to help the country and stuff. So that swing voter who he's been able to attract. Otherwise, at a very base level, the voting preferences are still dictated a lot by these. But in Indian elections, but swing voter. That where's that 10% going, as you say?
Would you also call it the educated voter?
No, I don't think it's got anything to do with education. It's got to do with in terms of that swing voter, that they're not that committed. They're thinking much more in practical terms in terms of what it is. So I don't think education's a defining thing there. In fact, as you know, the BJP's big strongholds are in urban centers, which tend to have higher education levels. So I don't think that's the key differentiator as such.
Okay. Let's get back to some of the key questions. I think we began this conversation by addressing the subject of economics, but from an objective standpoint. Okay, and we've spoken about election season, we've spoken about Modi ji, we've briefly touched upon Nitin Gadkari.
Yeah.
I would love to know your objective report card of the BJP in the last 10 years. You said that two decisions were bad, economically speaking, demonetization and...
As I said, the second the sharp I felt a country like India was not prepared for,
Right.
like having a complete draconian lockdown, because we don't have a welfare state or that kind of stuff to sort of do something of that kind. So I was generally against the sort of very strong reactions which we got to the pandemic, and I felt that those were the two decisions which I was very vocal against.
Okay. What about the rest of the report card? Why don't we actually do this in a timeline specific manner, maybe?
Okay.
So my question to you is, right from 2014, what were your hopes and aspirations as an Indian, as an economist? And then where did those hopes and aspirations go?
So I think that my sort of slight disappointment in the first term was the fact that he did not bring in enough fresh things. And some of it had lost because of the politics, like things like land reform. But even things like labor reform and stuff, I didn't feel that all that happened in the first term that could have happened. And also things like privatization. We have so many companies which are still run by the government. The whole talk that the government should not be in business, to the extent that, it's not the business of government to be in business and stuff like that. I didn't feel that followed through enough. In the first term, I still feel there was a sort of control mentality. We can't let go of our state assets. I have to control it. If I privatize the banks, who's going to give lending to some of the poorer people? It has to come through the system. So I felt that there was not enough economic reform that was done, particularly given the mandate and the things for fresh energy. So the first term, usually across the world, I find is that for economic performance, the best time, and I've done this study around the world, the best time for economic reform, which is of change, of new things that happen, is when a new government comes to power. In the first 18 months is when we typically see it, especially for countries already faced a crisis, because then the public is also backseat to do that. So I felt the first 18 months was too slow out of the gate, and a lot of the opportunities were missed in the first 18 months. And then I felt that demonetization was something which was just totally sort of unnecessary. So that's something which I felt I was very critical about in terms of when that happened and stuff. And so I felt the first term in terms of how it was done was, like, to me, somewhat disappointing in terms of that. The second term, ironically for me, has been better, which is very rarely the case, because the longer the government stay in power, the more complacent they get, the more entrenched they get. So I think that the second term, as I said, the two major things in the second term were, one, as I said, was that at least that even if they did the draconian lockdown, at least not going away and going crazy in terms of spending and putting India's financial and fiscal sort of outlook under great threat. At least that did not happen. And I think that because a lot of other governments did make that mistake, including in other emerging markets, other developing countries. So that was, I think, good. And the second thing, generally about trying to make India a bit more competitive, cutting corporate tax rates and doing that. I think that those were the two better things done in the second term in general. So a very strange thing. Normally with most governments, you find that they do best in the first 18 months, and the longer they stay in power, the more complacent they get, the more entrenched they get. And by the second term, it becomes all fatigue and stuff. I saw, at least in that regard, a different pattern play out with this current government compared to anything I've seen even in India and also internationally.
What went right in the second term on a very human level, according to you?
I think that maybe it was just sort of in terms of the fact that the growth rates really fell. Like by 2018, 19, the growth rate in India, had fallen quite a bit. So maybe there was a feeling that something needs to be done to spur growth now. And I said in the first term, there was too much anti-business talk, almost treating like all business people as crooks and stuff like that. I felt that sort of reduced. Now you have to understand that in India, I've always said it, that it's easy to call everyone a crook, but understand many people become crooks because the laws of the land and the regulations are such that to get anything done in this country, often you have to break the law or do something to circumvent the regulation to try and get anything done. So I think that policymakers sometimes need to understand that. Politicians need to understand that people don't just want to break laws and rules. Yeah, lots of people want to do that, but often they're doing it because of the fact that the rules and laws are so prohibitive that you can't do any business if you really follow it in the strictest sense in most industries. It's very different if you're a exporter, tech company based in Bangalore exporting and stuff. But I think that is some recognition which took place.
Are you always in sync with the updates in economic policy of the current government?
Updates means what?
In terms of if there are economic reforms coming up, is it your job to keenly observe?
Yeah.
For the sake of your actual professional job?
Yes.
It is, right?
Yes, of course.
So based on what's happening currently or over the last couple of years, what's your predictions for the third term?
So in terms of, I think third term, again, it depends, because I almost feel that a third term where if he comes with more modest expectations will be better. Because I think that the real risk is that, let's say he comes back with a bigger mandate. I think expectations will be very high in terms of what he will do. And I feel that, as we discussed in this country earlier in a conversation, that we're not a China, we're not other countries. The social fabric of this country is very different. The politics is very different. So doing anything too, dramatic may not be possible, but expectations will be very high. So I think that the nature of the mandate becomes very important here. That a mandate which is where the BJP is closer to, let's say, 260 or something like that, I think with more modest expectations may almost be better in terms of what can be achieved, and may also put them more on in terms of, a check and balance system, which is the fact that, they have to sort of be on their toes. There's less scope for complacency, because one thing which I've noticed in governments around the world, and I said this even for Putin and Erdogan, we were talking about them earlier, that by the time they got into the third term, they were economic disasters. There. What people forget about them is that someone like Russia's President Putin, or when they started out first, they were economic reformers. They were actually sort of reforming the countries and all. When they started out, the longer they stayed in power, they became disasters. Almost like hubris went to their head.
Why does that happen?
Hubris, arrogance.
Yes men around.
Yeah, exactly. That you don't take any criticism. You just listen to the echo chamber around you. In terms of anyone, even here in this country, that risk is there, which is that anyone who speaks against the government or someone is seen as anti-national, someone who needs to be trolled, someone who needs to be instantly discredited, without trying to go that, okay, what is the message? Now, it is true that there are many people, no matter what this government does, who are going to say negative things about it. Understood. The government, remember, has all the power. They should be interested in the message, not always in shooting the messenger. So in Russia, what happened was, and I'll tell you about this anecdote in Russia, which you may sort of find interesting to hear. So I was, as you know, my job is to invest across countries. And I always, I used to invest in Russia as part of my overall profile. And I'm also a writer. Now, I had met Putin as part of, a group of investors. We had met him when he'd come to New York. In his early days, in the early 2000s, he come. And when Putin would come to New York and meet us, I, in fact, was impressed. I thought that, Russia had gone through this complete chaos in the 1990s when it disintegrated. The Soviet Union disintegrated. Russia went through complete chaos. So I was very sort of, in terms of impressed that Putin's trying to come there and put stability. He cut taxes. He appeared very business friendly. And his basic deal was that, listen, you businesses, you keep out of politics and you can go do what you feel like. I'm there to create an environment which is good for you and to put this country back together after the disintegration that took place in the 1990s. So made him all very impressive and stuff like that. Then in the 2000s, and the Russian economy also did quite well. The commodity boom happened. It's a big commodity exporter, oil exporter. It did all very well. Then as the commodity prices began to sort of, not go up too much, by 2010, also the Russian economy seemed to be running out of steam. It was not doing that well and things like that. Nothing too perilous, but not doing that well. So I was going to Moscow to attend a conference, and I got a call from people who were hosting the conference that even Putin is going to be there at the conference. So they told me that since Putin's going to be there, their office is requesting that why don't you give a presentation when you're at the conference, because it would benefit Putin to listen to what you have to say, because, in terms of you're a large global investor, you're a writer, we value what you have to say, why don't you do that? So I said, okay, I'm coming for the conference, I'll do it. And they said to me I said, but what do you want me to say? So they said that give a frank objective view that what is your take on the Russian economy. I said, okay. I took the word frank literally. So I land up in Moscow. It's in the Moscow Convention Center, and Putin is there on stage. And then I'm called to come and give my talk at this conference about what I feel about Russia. I go on stage and then I start my presentation and I tell Putin then, I address him that, when you first came to power, the country was in chaos and stuff. And these are the steps you took to help the country stabilize. That's great. But now these are the problems in Russia. And I went A, B, C, D, too much corruption, too much focus on big business, not enough small and medium-sized enterprises, not, no ability to build any good brands. I went through the whole list about what the problems in, too dependent on just oil. All the problems in Russia were. There was hushed silence in the crowd. I could make out something was not working. What I did not realize was that this was being telecast live across Russia in terms of what I was saying, and Putin was sitting there. And he is very poker-faced. He looked at me, but he didn't say anything. He looked like he was taking notes down and stuff. I ended my speech, like in terms of shook hands, and then I went and sat. Then he came to speak on stage. He spoke in Russian. He never speaks in English ever. And I was hearing the translation. It seemed as if it was okay. He referred to my speech once or twice and said that he pointed this out and I guess we should take care of this and all that. But I could make out my conference organizers were not happy at what had happened. I went back to my room and I slept then in the evening. Next morning, I was woken up by my office in New York. With, those days I was working at Morgan Stanley, and I was called by, one of the top people at Morgan Stanley saying, "What have you done?" I'm like, "What have I done?" He said, "Haven't you read the Russian newspapers this morning?" I said, "No, I've not read. I don't read Russian. What happened?" So they said that Putin has, the press there is controlled all by Putin and his people, the Kremlin press, and they have really attacked you. They've really said that who is this guy who's come here to, spoil the party and stuff. Clearly, they were directed to go after me. And in terms of all the Morgan Stanley people were concerned that their business in Russia, whichever they had, would get destroyed because I had gone out and spoken so candidly, frankly, like the word to use. So I was advised then, you should leave Moscow.
Or else?
No, they said, just advise, just go. By the internal people, the Morgan Stanley people telling me. So I left Russia and then I've not gone back since then. Again, it showed me how much this guy had changed. In the early 2000s, when you'd meet him, he was taking inputs. He was telling you what he's doing to make Russia right. 10 years more in power. He sort of thinks Russia is doing fine. I've got all this oil money and I'm sitting here. And who is this guy who's come here and telling me in terms of what I should do and what's wrong with this economy? And the whole system had been created where anybody who speaks against Russia or speaks against, even if I'm not speaking against, I'm giving feedback. And it's my investor interest to see Russia do better. But because I said all this, I've been completely blacklisted, and no matter what happens, I don't want a similar ecosystem to be created in India, where if you say something or you do something very, very frankly, you are going to be instantly targeted for being anti-national, for being this. I think that's what I don't want to see happen in a Modi third term.
So, sir, frankly speaking, what would you have the Modi government change in the third term?
I've learned from Putin, there's no point saying it. Because they won't listen anyway. So what's the point for me to say it?
But you have a bunch of changes in your head.
No, meaning that I have a rough template that any government should keep on privatizing more, should sort of give more, economic freedom to its people, should not be in the business of running so many industries that they have. I mean, just look at in this country also in terms of how many industries, like what I call privatization by malign neglect, which is that you sort of don't privatize it, but those industries anyway sort of, fall, and you finally sell in Air India at some, at some bankrupt type valuation. I don't want that kind of stuff to happen. But so yes, of course, I've got sort of things at ABC, but that's based on my international experience. But no one ever asked me for advice, and I never give advice because I feel that nobody really wants to listen. They will do exactly what they want to do. That's my reading of not just here, but most countries in the world.
If I were the PM, you'd be my CEA.
Yeah, right.
And my first conversation with you would be, tell me where I'm going wrong. Because there's no way that one human being could know everything about the details of economic policy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think so, but as I said, that I don't know in terms of that how well it is received. I just don't know. I don't meet politicians in this country one-on-one. I meet them when I go on my election trip groups. But so I don't meet policymakers one-on-one, partly because I feel it affects my objectivity. Because I'm not able to write then freely about it once you get too close to your subject.
I've hosted both Sanjeev Sanyal sir and Dr. Raghuram Rajan on the show, and I respect both of them. I don't know enough about economics to be able to gauge who's saying the truth or whose theories actually make more sense. Have you by any chance watched either or both of those episodes?
In terms of, I know what they say. In terms of, I know, in terms of, I know roughly what the case is. And as I said, that they come from very different viewpoints in terms of that. I think that the key for the government or for the Prime Minister is how do you separate the message from any ulterior motives? Like, because anybody coming from the government is on a public, I hate to say it, is never going to be able to tell you objectively what's going on because they just can't. I know it. Even when I meet politicians and stuff, what they say on the record and off the record is so different. All of them.
Yeah.
So I think that, so there's no point. I mean, even if I can be very frank, that when you get official people on there, they cannot say what they really feel. It's just very hard to do it on air. And a lot of them, become indoctrinated that they just have to do that.
Politicians are my only genre of guests who are nicer off camera than on camera. Everyone else wants to show the nicest version on camera to the world.
Right.
Politicians kind of want to show a harsh version.
Really?
Yeah,
okay,
a little
very
bit.
Interesting. Okay.
I think when they sit down for a conversation like this, they assume that I'm a journalist and I'm going to attack them. So they have their guard up. The moment the cameras go off, they become really nice. They offer food. Personality changes.
Yeah.
They become more casual. They become more fun. It's just not a podcast that I look forward to when I have to speak to a politician. I know it's going to be high profile and it's going to create waves, etc. But it's a podcast that I feel deeply discomforted doing. And I still want to do more of them.
But I totally relate to that because as we spoke about my election trips, whenever I meet politicians, I'm going to get the canned lines, I feel, very often. Very rarely will you get something else. You ask them how many seats they're going to get. Depends what side they're on. They'll tell you how many, what the official line is and stuff like that. So you're totally correct. And especially, when you meet them in a group of 20 people, then they are like, in terms of nothing they really say is of that much value on record. But yeah, if you try to get things off the record is what you look for.
Can we speak a little bit about Dr. Raghuram Rajan?
Mm-hmm.
He's been on the show. I remember when I was in college, like 10 years ago, his name was so highly regarded in every single circle that you went. You interact with anyone, irrespective of their political opinions. He was one guy who was loved and respected.
Right.
Cut to 2024, and I think that people view him with a political lens.
Yeah.
The pro-BJP listeners, viewers, people just assume that he's an agent of America and he's an agent of the Congress and will always speak anti-BJP. And people who are anti-BJP view him as a messiah. So I loved interacting with him, honestly. He did kind of openly say that, I think the crux of what he said was that this whole angle about going after manufacturing should not be the way the current government should look at themselves. In fact, our strength as Indians is that we run service-based businesses and we should fuel that sector much more. Sanjeev Sanyal on the other end, who is effectively working with the government, therefore will carry forward the word of what the BJP government is currently thinking. He says that no, we need to get out of the way of businesses. And secondly, he says that the focus is on manufacturing. I don't know who to listen to or who's right. And I also know that there's an art of economics at play. Therefore, I'm trying to understand what the best way forward is. And my best way forward is you, good sir. So tell me what's best for them.
Yeah, but they're defining the debate the way they want to, which is fine, right? Which is what they want. my big thing about like to this government has been, I mean, like in terms of, like if I've objected to anything in terms of that, what do I want to see? I want to see, I agree with the broad sentiment that the government needs to keep its involvement in business to a minimum. Rather than directing this or directing that and all that.
Sure.
I fundamentally believe that the government needs to do that. And my, as I've said so even in the past, I'll say it here again, that one of my big criticisms has been that if you give too much power to the investigative agencies, the term they use, iced, as you must have heard of, which is income tax, in terms of CBI, Enforcement Directorate, if you give them too much power, you may be doing it from a political perspective that, okay, I want to clean it up or I want to target some leaders and stuff, right? That's what you're doing. Once they have that power, there's a tendency to abuse that and to go after and use it against businesses the way they want to. And therefore, a lot of businesses feel threatened. And many business people want to leave India or set up things abroad, which is not good for the country.
Yeah.
So I'd say that for me, that is something which I'd like the government to really rein in. That is not something which they should be doing.
I've heard too many of my friends from the world of business voice this sentiment of wanting to live abroad or set up their stuff abroad. And these are people, again, who never say it publicly.
Yes.
But they'll all say it behind cameras. That
Exactly.
Set up your business abroad and ideally move abroad.
Yes.
This is what's discomforting for me.
Yes.
I'm just trying to relay objective truth and objective opinion.
Yes.
I don't have a strong political opinion myself.
Yes.
Can we break down this angle from both the government side as well as the business owner side?
The government will tell you we're cleaning out corruption. We're trying to make a cleaner system here. We're trying to do that. I'm trying to tell you that in terms of that, the problem is not so much the system, it's the rules and regulations you have in place. And giving any government authorities so much power is never a good idea.
Sure.
That is against the concept of giving businesses like the freedom and for the government to stay out. So I'm very clearly in terms of that this has gone too far. Of course, you want you don't want unchecked corruption of the kind we had in the 2010s and stuff like that, where everybody could bribe their way, get a license for this, get a license for that. That's unchecked corruption. That's not good. But here, where it is like the evidence is so clear, which is that it's being done from a political perspective, that if people cross over to a particular party or something like that, then all of a sudden that person becomes clean and stuff like that, which I think is there to be seen. It's not for me to infer anything. It's there to be seen. I think that needs to be checked because that's hurting private business confidence. That is why, if you notice that the business investment, despite all the talk in India, and the consumer is doing very well, and you see the boom out here, but for some reason, both foreign investment in India and even domestic business investment has been much slower to pick up. This is data talking now. This is not me talking. Data will show you this in terms of, whether it's foreign portfolio investment, foreign direct investment as a share of the economy. It's got to do with domestic business investment. All that hasn't picked up as much as I'd like it to pick up. In fact, some of it is even trending down. And there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is this, which is that if people are going to be scared, then they may not invest so much in the country and look to instead move investment abroad. That's one of the risks. And I think that this government, in a third term, if it has a third term, then needs to address that issue in its own self-interest, in the country's interest.
I want to bring up two names, Dhruv Rathi and Palki Sharma. Okay. The narrative from Dhruv Rathi and everyone who is anti-BJP is that we're living in a phase which is the start of a dictatorship. That is the opinion out there from the whole anti-BJP part of India. Palki Sharma was on the show and she spoke about the soft power of a nation and how the soft power does determine certain human decisions. For example, when you're talking about foreign direct investment increasing in India, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people in a room. It's a bunch of people, often other nationality, that have a certain opinion on India. And definitely they have their own business agenda and their analysis of what's happening in our country. But perhaps a weakened image of India or a dictatorial image of India on the global map will sway their decisions against our country. Now, is this too generalized and too amateur a thought? or this is where you're going with your narrative as well, that we need to like globally our reputation is taking a hit because of this whole dictatorial tag?
No, I think it's a much more practical decision that businesses make. Like China also, for example, as I said, China attracted. Let me put this in perspective.
Sure.
Today, India, if you look at the foreign direct investment India is attracting, it's about 1% of GDP or so. When China was doing well, it was attracting 4% of GDP in terms of that. Now, China also had a communist government, but the businesses and foreigners felt that they could go on the ground and do what they felt like. So it's less about this. As I said, we love to politicize everything, democracy versus authoritarian and stuff. A lot of it is about pragmatism. That if a foreign business thinking, if I go to India, can I get fair treatment to do what I feel like? Or am I going to be targeted and harassed by some authority from the tax department or some random query from there? Are my people going to not be, do my people want to move to India? Or maybe they won't move because the pollution so much. You have so many people today who say that we don't want to move back because of the pollution which is there, like in some of these big cities and stuff like that. So they're making those pragmatic decisions. They're not making decisions that, okay, if I put a business in India, how much growth can I get? What are my costs going to be? And who are the people who can go there and do this? So I think that the fact of the matter is that our foreign direct investment coming into India today is very low at only 1% of GDP. There are projects being announced, but the flows are still low. And we have to figure out on the ground, what's going on? Why are people not coming more into this country?
Why do you think people are not?
As I said, I offered one reason for it, that it's still a very difficult place to do business on the ground.
Can that be changed?
Of course it can be changed. You can sit down there and see, okay, what is it that they want? There can be an engagement. Okay, what is it that you need? Why do we need 10 permissions? If I'm setting up an office in India, why do I need 10 more permissions to set up an office in India compared to, let's say, setting up an office in Mexico or setting up an office in Indonesia? You can compare all these things. And don't go by these indices, ease of doing business, because those can easily be manipulated again. It's about, if it's not happening, let's sit down with these people and ask them why is it not happening? Why are we not getting more flows? What is it that you can do? To get it. Again, this is to make India better. Now, India is a very large market. We can do very well even without foreigners. I know that. That will be some of the comeback in the stock market. I've seen that the domestic investors are the ones who are lifting the stock market. Foreign investors have become more and more marginal, which is fine. I'm just looking for India to become better and better. Am I happy with the India's growth story today? Yeah, I think it's a pretty decent growth story. But my ambition as an Indian is that how do I make it better? How do I get more feedback? Don't keep shooting the messenger in terms of whoever the person is giving you the feedback. Yes, there are some messengers with ulterior motives, with political affiliations, that in any country that's the case. But as a government, my objective should be, how do I get the best inputs? And I think there's a lot of skepticism there that anybody who says even something nuanced or not, which is one-way narrative, generally that messenger is shot down.
I think the general sentiment is that, and I think you're kind of echoing the same sentiment, the government currently takes all feedback as a personal attack, which it's not.
Yes.
And the same mechanism of not taking feedback is what's harming the growth that we could see. And the government has done a fair job. They've done a good job in the last 10 years, but they could have done a great job with a few changes.
Yes.
So why not look at the third term as an opportunity to take feedback from the naysayers?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add to this?
No, I'd say, since you asked me, as I said, that my job is that of an observer, investor, and writer. I have no ambition of ever joining government because I feel that I'm not fit for any of that. But since you're asking me as an Indian speaking on this show, my job is to also say about what I've learned from other countries and how to make an India an even better place. I love coming here, but I'd love to spend even more time here if I could. I'd love to not have to deal with pollution and things in winter and stuff like, Delhi where my family lives. It's just in terms of it's become an unlivable city in many ways because of things like pollution and stuff. A city I love and I grew up in. So I just want to, still see us get there. And I know that China also had a big pollution problem as it was developing. It cleaned it up now. You go to Beijing today, Shanghai today, there's no pollution problem.
How did they clean it up?
They took many steps again about controlling industries, who can do what in terms of that, but in terms of the fact that they prioritize people's lifestyles, that beyond a point that this is what we need to prioritize and we need to do that, not get caught in political slugfest. It's the state governments should be doing this, the national government should be doing that. They resolved that. But it took a while even in China. I mean, as you know, like I've in fact been quite pessimistic on China's growth in the last few years and stuff. But they did do we have to give them credit for what? They had a big pollution problem. They've sorted it out. We have a problem today. We still are not doing anything to sort it out.
When you speak about our country in influential rooms abroad, what's the general sentiment?
I'd say that from an economic perspective is generally positive, that people want to do more in India. They are looking for more opportunities in India. The flows have not come through, but generally the economic sentiment is positive. As you know, like I literally wear two hats, right? One is that of an investor and that other one is the writer. Unfortunately, among all my writer friends, which are in the media and I've written for so many publications the sentiment is very negative because of what is seen as democracy under threat. So among all my writer friends, that image is very dominant. So again, it's like a total dual narrative. If I go and have, like a dinner with my business friends in New York and all that, the general economic impression of India is positive. If I go the next day for, dinner with my writer friends, the political sentiment is quite negative in that people believe that democracy is truly under threat and under assault in India.
Do you believe that democracy is truly under threat and assault?
Well, I think that some institutions have been weakened, as I've said, but I still have faith in the Indian public, that the Indian public will keep providing checks and balances. And the election trip I just completed in the last week or so gave me more confidence that we are underestimating the Indian public here. Yes, they're very practical. They will accept some of the authoritarian tactics of the government. If they think that the benefits are coming to them, they will do that. But if that does not happen, they're not wedded to any regime. They are like, listen, this is our self-interest. We're going to do what comes for us. So I'm a bit more optimistic of that. Yes, there's no doubt that the institutions have been weakened. There's no, how can we deny that the quality of the election commission we have today is nowhere close to what we used to have in the past. The assault on anybody in the media who has tried to speak against has been quite intense. So that has been weakened. I mean, I think that's there. But it's been covered up, I think, a bit because of the fact that the economic narrative has become more positive, which is also their case. But I have a feeling that this is a very transactional relationship that people have. That as long as the economy for now is okay, we are okay. But if the economy falters a bit, I'll feel that these same people will come, back to haunt this government if the economy falters a bit, and especially. As I said, that now on this trip, in fact, I noticed that some of that may already be happening, that some impatience is creeping in, especially with the local candidate and local staff, that what has this person done for me? Why should I be voting for someone in Delhi if this person here on the ground hasn't done enough work for me?
Is the economy growing as well as the government's data and the government's narrative suggest? Because we're given an image of an extremely booming economy, etc., etc. And I think I've reached a point now where I don't trust the data available. I've just realized that data can be forged as well.
But I think that, this boom is a very relative term, because even as per the government data, what is the growth rate we're growing at? It's about 6 to 7%.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What is a boom typically? It depends how you define a boom. When China was booming, its growth rate was 10%. When Korea, Taiwan, all these East Asian countries are booming, the growth rates were 10%. Now, of course, it was a different era. Today, growth everywhere is much slower. So it's very hard to grow at 10. But I don't have much quarrel with a 6-7% type growth rate, because if you look at the company's revenue numbers, generally they are in sync. And those companies are reporting independently. There are thousands of companies reporting independent data. It's not government stuff. It's generally in sync. But would you classify 6% growth as a boom? I think it's a relatively good, decent growth rate, But boom is a very strong word. Boom is what 9-10% growth rates look like, which China did during its, or even Korea, Taiwan, other countries did.
Do you think that the BJP government is trying to take it to that growth rate?
I think everyone's given up on that ambition. I don't feel anyone's talking about 9-10% anymore. Maybe they'll talk because I think they realize that the kind of reforms you need to do for that, as we discussed at the outset of the program, there's no appetite. There's no, in this country, that sort of appetite is not there to carry out those kind of, ruthless capitalist reforms. I don't think that appetite is there.
Because of the fabric of our society.
Yes, because of the fabric of a society, because of the fact that it tends to be much more socialist, and also because if you look at the fact that, but the one good thing in India, which I will say, which is that our benefit is that, which I think we're so focused on Modi and the government center, that there's a lot of competitive federalism which is going on. States are competing much more with each other now. So if you go to all these places where all these people go, the Davos and everywhere, a lot of state governments now go and make independent presentations, their own contingent. So Telangana will be sort of competing almost with Maharashtra or like Andhra Pradesh and all, but attracting more investment compared to those states. I think we underestimate that positive dynamic which is happening. A lot of state governments are now, see, in this country, a lot of power is with the state chief ministers. Again, I think this is a problem of having a very Delhi-Bombay centric sometimes conversation, that we are very focused on Modi, national government and stuff. This is a place where the state chief ministers have a lot of power and a lot of decisions are made at a state level. There's a lot of competition between states about what do we do, and there you see a big change take place. Like the most fascinating finding, since you like data and we can talk about it, on this trip that I did, because it's a table I maintain. It's my favorite table. I publish it like regularly. Is if you the rankings of the different states of India by just their wealth or their per capita income. What's the ranking? It's surprising how things have changed in India and among that pecking order. Which are the best or the richest states in India today? Karnataka, Telangana, right? Which is a state which has seen the biggest decline in the last 30 to 40 years in India? Maharashtra. Bombay, being here, despite that, no state has seen a bigger decline in its rankings in the recent history than Maharashtra has seen out there. So very different kind of narratives again, right? So you go there, as I said, that you find there are state level stories. There's a state level federalism which is happening. So that tells you that there's an India which is all about the center, and we talk about Modi, and that's the big focus of the election now. But let's not lose sight of these state level narratives and how this competitive federalism, as we call it, between different states shifts things, how states can evolve. Karnataka, in terms of what's happened there, is incredible. And it's not just Bangalore and the IT boom. It's the agricultural boom across Karnataka that you get to see. It's visible signs. We drove across Karnataka on a previous election trip, and we could see so much prosperity. We traveled. Last year I covered the Karnataka election. I traveled all the way. We drove all the way from Bangalore to Mysore to Chikmagalur and all the way up to Hubli. And the prosperity we saw, particularly in the southern belt, made like this, look like a $4,000-5,000 middle income country and stuff. This time, we drove through Maharashtra, and the scenes were quite sad. We drove through these districts like Beed and the places around that. And there's so much poverty and backward stuff. You can see the difference is visible. So like all these two states have become the tale of two different countries almost. And they used to have similar wealth and per capita income levels, let's say 15 years ago. And today one has surged and the other one has lagged big time.
The reason being?
Now again, so we try and go. Now in Karnataka's phase, they've been lucky with the tech boom, but also the agricultural sector there has done well. And again, we like to point out which government's done better, which is not done better. Guess what? In Karnataka, they've changed government every 5 years. And generally, the governments have been able to get the basics correct, even if the Bangalore city is a bit of a mess, but they get the basics correct and the state moves on. Maharashtra's case, it's not happened. So I posed this question to Uddhav and Aditya Thackeray when we met them. Why is Maharashtra doing so poorly? Now their answer was obviously that because they feel that all the benefits now go to Gujarat And so Maharashtra is being undermined, whether it's got to do with, where the gift city is set up, whether it's got to do with like a ban on onion exports and all, which all hurt Maharashtra much more than they hurt Gujarat. That's their thinking. But generally in Maharashtra, I think something has gone wrong. Maybe it's also got to do with that a lot of people speak in Maharashtra that it's so tough to get anything done here unless, the corruption is very big, the amount you have to pay for land and to do that has become very big. So I think that these are some of the reasons that we're trying to probe. But I think that now this is the kind of thing that government need to be thinking of. Why is Maharashtra in decline despite having a city like Mumbai? And why has Karnataka done so well in terms of despite having a different government every 5 years? So these are some of the findings which I find are quite remarkable as we travel.
What's the solution for our state?
No, as I said, I think in our state, I don't know what a solution is, but I think that the idea is that we have to think about how to spread the wealth around, because Bombay and this triangle of Mumbai, Nashik and Pune, this golden triangle is where the entire thing has been concentrated. The rest of the state, I think, has been neglected a lot. And the agricultural sector in this state in particular is in a really bad way. So maximum number of farmer suicides in the country happen in Maharashtra. This time when we traveled, so much distress we saw amongst the farmers, the agrarian sector, a lot of anger also. So I think that needs to be sort of, done. And this whole idea we have to look at it is this whole complaint of the opposition. I don't know enough about it. I can't comment on whether there's preferential treatment given to one state over another, and that's hurting the prospects of this state.
Okay. I think we've reached the end of the podcast because it was a very, very loaded episode. I did not expect it to be as loaded as it became. So very, very grateful to you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you. Had a very, very stimulating conversation today. And I'm very happy to have introduced you to this new section of the digital population. So I hope you had fun on today's episode, sir.
No, totally. I mean, time went by.
It's been more than a couple of hours of us speaking.
Yes, that's right.
Are there any signing off notes you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I think, as I said, we have covered a lot. And I just feel very fortunate to sort of, be able to see what's happening in the rest of the world. And that's what that's my passion. So, which is that I love travel. I love seeing what's happening in different parts of the world, and traveling within my own country, India, at least of origin, is something that I really enjoy doing. But I'd say that I still feel generally hopeful and optimistic about, what's going forward. And I think that next time we come, maybe we'll, I was very impressed to hear about your fitness regimen. And next time we come, we should speak more about maybe that, because that's a area of huge personal interest and passion for me as I was chatting with you. And maybe next time we should do that.
No, likewise, sir. Also, the next time we're going to get into geopolitics a bit, because that's what I assumed today's conversation would be about. And I'm glad that we went on this national politics route, because not everyone is willing to have an unbiased, objective conversation when it comes to national politics. So, the high five I did at the start, it was because my heart actually high-fived your heart.
Right.
So, thank you, sir. Need more Indians like you who are as educated, as professionally accomplished, to actually speak about national issues this boldly. So, thank you. Very, very grateful. And we hope to welcome you to TRS again.
Thanks, Ranveer. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the epic debut of Ruchir Sharma on TRS. I crave for guests like this. I crave for conversations like this, which are almost entirely objective, which are not fueled by any kind of political leanings. And that's very, very, very difficult to find in the modern day. As I said earlier, of all the political guests that we've had on the show, I feel Ruchir sir was one of the most unbiased, one of the most objective, which is why he's going to be back on the show very soon. Please make sure you share this particular episode on your WhatsApp groups, on your society groups. Want to spread objective, data-backed knowledge as far as possible, especially when it comes to the Indian internet. Ruchir Sharma is going to be back soon on TRS, and the next time it's going to be all about geopolitics. Thank you for all the love and support, everyone. TRS is just going to keep growing, baby.